talking about mainly, but he's aware that we do have some interest in mining, say, Compton Martin area here in Lagden, so he's going to touch on that as well. And we were talking just beforehand and aware that quite a few of the Lagden men, young men, went across to Wales to work in the mines because they needed the work there, not so much in agriculture anymore, so that's where we find them when we look at the census very often. So thank you very much, Gary. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's an expression. You can take the boy out of Bedminster, but you can't take the Bedminster out of the boy. It's something about being a Bedminster boy, you know, that you grow up, in the area and you get drawn back to it. And we're still very much part of the community of Wimmer Hill, even though we've not lived on the hill for probably 50 years now. And so I've been involved in local history most of my life. 41 years with the Barton Hill History Group, and like people say. I wish I would have spoke to my granddad. I wish I would have written down what my grandma would have said. I was the complete opposite. That I would be nagging them all the time. Tell me more stories. What was it like growing up in Bedminster? What was it like growing up in Barton Hill? And I'm sure, when I left on a Sunday morning lunchtime, they all for that. Thank God he's asked the same story. That's why. But that was just in me, I guess, and it's just travelled through me all my life in collecting stories and telling stories about working class history, particularly related to Barton Hill and to Bedminster. I'm going to play you a little bit of music, which some of you heard as I came in. It's from an amazing group of men called the Pitman Poets, and we came across them in Buxton in Derbyshire when we were going to see another concert, and I said to my wife, I said, this sounds amazing, we've got to go and see them, because they were all the sons of, or grandsons of coal miners. So their entire life they collected stories of the North East. So we're talking about Durham, Yorkshire, Tyne and Wear, etc, etc. And this song is called, well, you'll pick it up, I don't really want to, I want you to listen to the words because they are quite good. A little bit.
There's a black and lustrous treasure lying deep beneath this land. Way down, black diamonds to be found. So they sent 1,000,000 men down there with shovels in their hands, looking for black diamonds a mile beneath the ground. It brought power to the factories, the engines and the mills. Way down, black diamonds to be found. But it said, don't forget the power I've got to choke and maim and kill. Looking for black diamonds a mile beneath the ground. From the coast of County Durham to the sands of South Australia, way down, black diamonds to be found. From the mountains of Kentucky to the hills of Pennsylvania, looking for black diamonds a mile beneath the ground. Now the 30 bits of silver, its future has been sold. Way down, black diamonds to be found. But they'll be glad of some black diamond when the nights are turning cold. Looking for black diamonds a mile beneath the ground. Way down, black diamonds to be found. Down in the darkness, that's where we are bound. Way down, black diamonds to be found. Shining in the lamplight a mile beneath the ground. There's a black and lustrous treasure lying deep beneath this land.
Black Diamonds. What a wonderful song. And the main singer there was he was the lead singer of a band called Lindisfarne. You remember them, Fog on the Tyne? And we went to see them recently at Frome because we thought, well, we've picked up the story really of this fantastic folk band. And we were the youngest there, but it was brilliant. Anyway, so my title of my talk today is called Bedminster Coal, Blood, Sweat and Tears. And it's pretty clear in the title, it's what's on the tin basically. We're going to look at the way in which coal mining had an impact on people in terms of the sad ways that people died and were injured, the sweat and tears in terms of the terrible working conditions that Bedminster miners had to cope with, and all miners had to cope with, and of course the tears of the effect on families and communities when big disasters occurred that we will look at. Now, on the screen in front of you, there are headlines for newspapers. So the date on the right is actually the date of a newspaper, and they are all related to deaths of coal miners. Now you might say, well, Garry, yeah, I understand that. They're all from the same family. Yeah. So, basically, I'm going to split the talk into two shifts down the mine today. The first bit will to explain to you about the research behind where I am with the family story, and then I'll have a look at Bedminster itself in terms of the coal mines, in terms of the poverty and the inequality that exists there, and concentrate just a little bit on some of the same family, the Garland miners, and then we'll finish off with an actual disaster. And the reason we've got the speaker partly is to hear the wonderful music, but also there will be some explosive noises later on, okay? Right, so where did we start? So we started with this certificate. Bear with me, guys. Here you are. Whoop. Yeah, so we were just chatting away one Sunday afternoon, as you do, in terms of talking about our grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth, and we knew that my wife's grandfather, George Fox, was a coal miner in Bedminster. We knew that, but we knew that there were no more coal miners back in the previous generations. But when we got out this marriage certificate of Granny Fox, as she was known, we saw that on one side here there is information stating that her father, Thomas Garland, there's Elizabeth over there, Granny Fox, was a coal miner. And we didn't know that. So this was like a, wow, this is incredible, what are we going to do about it? I said to Mal, give me an hour. So I get onto Ancestry, and within an hour I'd managed to find 5 generations of coal miners. And then I started to see there was more stories emerging of deaths and injuries and so forth. So if you do your family history, the most important certificate to use is the marriage certificate, because it pushes back a previous generation. You get 2 sets of names. They are Francis Fox, dock labourer, Thomas Garland, coal miner, and it also says whether they're alive or deceased. It often says in brackets there. So there's a close-up of Thomas. All right. So we've got the picture, everybody. That's where we are. So Garry then, within an hour, suddenly gets his family tree sorted out. William, George, Daniel, Thomas, and then at the bottom there you'll see Elizabeth, Granny Fox, and her 4 brothers. She wasn't a coal miner, by the way. Right? But there's Thomas, there's Bill, there's Arthur Edward, and Henry Daniel. And the code next then is just my code for the number of Garland miners. And there were a lot of Garland miners. There were, you know, in simple terms, if you had 6 sons, which many of them did, 5, 6, 4, 7 sons, they all followed the father. It was just a normal procedure that you would follow your dad into the mine. So that's why there are a lot of Garland miners in Bedminster. Okay, a bit of geography. I was a geographer by trade. My degree was in geography and geology, even though I taught a lot of history as well for nearly 40 years. But let's do a bit of basic geography. What are all these big blobs here on our map of? They're called, yeah, they're actually coal fields, meaning that that's the area of geology that the coal stretches from. Now, if you look at the darker patches and then try to see it as a proportion of the British Isles, it gives you a real insight of how much coal is beneath our feet. Yeah, and you can see the great concentrations of Yorkshire and Lancashire and the North East I mentioned to you, and Scotland. And did you know there was a coalfield in Kent? Yeah, so one of the last to close there, and then we've got our area then, and we've got the South Wales coalfields as well. And there are a few books on coal mining in Bristol, and one of them is a very good one written by Fred Moss, who was a miner in Speedwell in East Bristol, and I just love that sort of, it wasn't his title, but you know, I just love that sentence. But once upon a time, Bristol was a city of pits. And if you say that to the generation below me, or even my generation, people of my age, in the 60s, they probably would say, what are you talking about, Garry? There's no coal mine in Bristol. You certainly go down to the generation before me, they wouldn't have a clue, because there's not a lot of clues left. That's the sad thing about it. So that's why I think it's quite important for me to keep telling these stories, collecting the stories and passing them on to our generation and to the next generation. So we've got the Bristol coalfield, we've got the South Gloucestershire coalfield, lovely name places like Coal Pit Heath, you know, good ways of helping us. We've got the North Somerset coalfield, and this it's not my map, so I'm going to be critical of it. It should be much bigger because it should include the Chew Valley coalfields of Pensford and Bromley, etc., etc. Yeah, so there you are. So you can see in our area that there would, you know, the potential of migration between all these places are quite clear. So, you know, if work slowed down at Pensford, then they would go into Bristol for work, or if it slowed down in Bristol, they would come out to the coalfield. Likewise, as you said, Jackie, you know, the evidence is quite clear. Miners would migrate to wherever there's work. So there is a strong South Wales link, particularly. Okay. Right, so I don't know how well you know Bedminster and where it is, but here's a basic geography for you. This is where I grew up in Victoria Park, here on Woodmer Hill. There's the main railway line, come from Templemead here down to Bedminster Station. And of course there, the Cathedral of Bedminster, Asda, where the people of Bedminster pray and worship every day because it gives them so much. And then, you know, you can see this sort of elongated mass of housing that stretched out from Redcliffe Hill, really, right the way down to Ashton. It was a very large, well, you'll see in the next cover, it was a very large village, really, because at one time it wasn't actually part of Bristol. So all that is, you know, typical inner city Victorian terrace housing. Okay, so do you know where North Street is? Yeah, okay. So going from the Rex Cinema, going from the London Inn, moving towards the City Ground, moving towards the tobacco factory, we've got North Street. And this is North Street, everybody, in 1828. Right? Full of houses? No, not at all. Full of trees, orchards, meadows, etc., etc. Right? So very rural. Could be out here, couldn't it? By 1855 Ashmead map, it's not a very clear map, but you can just about see some of the houses creeping along, moving this way out towards Ashton. And there's the evidence of a little colliery there called Northside Colliery. But yeah, just creeping around. Then we had the two shafts, the Malago and Argus shafts, which you know, is often referred to as the Malago Vale and Argus pits, and those are do you know where Cameron balloons are? Just up from there, there's a Tesco on the left there. That's the site of the pits there. Okay, they were not massive pits. They were not huge pits in terms of numbers employed there. In fact, Pensford and Bromley, more so Pensford, probably had slightly more. Maybe on average there might have been about 300 plus at Pensford at its peak. Probably 180 to 200 at Bromley Pit. But Bromley Pit struggled a lot, and the numbers never really stayed that high. So we're looking at relatively small pits, the four big ones, but there probably were up to 20 others. 1-man, 2-man pits, 5-man, 10-man pits. They were spread all over Bedminster, particularly in the early days when shafts weren't put down, they would have just been excavated on the surface, which we've got a lot of evidence in the Chew Valley as well, very small one-man pits. Okay, the masters. So, Bedminster was controlled by the mafia. Not really, but I'll use that phrase. There were a few major landowners who controlled very much the coming and goings of everything in Bedminster. And I'll come on to one in a moment. You can probably guess who I'm going to be talking about. And the phrase itself, when you think of a master, you think of a school teacher, maybe. You might think of a slave owner. And then the servants, you might think of somebody who worked in a big house, or you might think of a slave, perhaps. And I was really surprised to see this phrase used right up into the 20th century, that the coal miners still refer to their bosses as the masters, less so masters to the workers, but certainly in the middle and latter part of the Victorian period, the mine owners there was still reference to them as servants. So this hierarchy was really clear in Bedminster, probably more so than I've ever seen, this the idea of masters and servants. Okay, so there you are. There's a family that you probably know a little bit about, the Smythes, right? And the Smythes own, not all of Bedminster, but they own a lot of Bedminster. They own the land, they own the housing, and they own the coal rights as well, the royalties from the coal that came out of the ground. So, for every ton of coal that was taken out by a miner would get, this is sort of roughly speaking, and it did vary quite a lot, if it was piecework, 7.5 pence a ton, right? So we're talking about, say, the weight of a car, a couple of tubs, maybe, perhaps. For every ton that was produced, Greville Smythe took 8 pence. So, with all due respect, he didn't do a lot for that, but the miners grafted 12 hours a day, for their work. So we have this situation where the royalties were quite high in Bedminster pits, and consequently, the mine management had to put a price, which included obviously the price to pay the worker and the price for paying Mr. Smythe, right? So if the miners wanted more money, then the price of coal would go up. And if the Smythe wanted more money, again the price of coal would go up. And there was often a constant battle between keeping the miners' pay low to keep Mr. Smythe happy if he wanted a little bit more money. So they made a lot of money, thank you very much, out of the royalties from coal, out of the rents from the cottages, because most miners in Victorian times, well, probably I would say virtually all miners, would not have owned their home. You would have rented your own house. I'm sure your grandparents would have done the same. My grandparents in Bedminster bought their house in 1931 for about £300, and it's now worth about 400,000. But we haven't got it anymore, unfortunately, which is a real shame. But how did they find the money? I just don't know how they found that money in those days. But whatever. So the servants. This is a compilation of a few photographs here. There's a book on, there's 2 books on Bedminster coal mining. This is the Miners' Memories book is full of miners' memories. That's what it's called, right? And it's just, we were really lucky, I guess, that in the late 80s, 1980s, the last of the coal miners were around. So somebody somewhere thought, right, we need to get their memories. So they collected their memories and put this book together called Miners' Memories. And there is a second book, which I'll show you in a moment, is a much more detailed book, but doesn't contain miners' memories. Not so much. Anyway, I'm a bit nosy, as you probably worked out by the way I said about my grandparents, asking them questions going on. There was this chap outside our house in Stanton Wick, and I said to them, he looks interesting, I'm going to go talk to him. So hello, I said, oh, Garry, blah, 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 and we got talking about coal mining, and he said, oh, you'd be really interested. I've got at home a written account by somebody who lived just up the road from you, who worked in the pits in Bromley and Pensford, would you be interested in it? And I said, yes please. So he gave it to me. And in there, it was full of little sketches as well. And the first thing that, I knew just a little bit about this particular piece of equipment, but it really shocked me. It's called the Gus and Crook. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, right? What it was when you get your job as a miner at 14, 15, in the 1920s this is, I mean, you obviously got to go back 12, 13 years of age if you go back 100 years, your first job was extremely boring. You just sat next to a door all day and you opened it up right? As you let the air in and out, or you let the trucks in and out. Then you got promotion to be somebody who would carry the coal. Not to dig the coal, but to carry it. So imagine going from the most boring job in the world to the most gruesome job in the world within minutes, sort of thing, you know? And this is how it worked. A belt was put around the waist, and around the waist, which this belt was either made of leather or of rope, and then connected to that belt was a chain that went through the legs, right? And so what this guy had to do, sitting there, Morris, he had to crawl on his knees and pull the tub along. So if the miners here, they often work in 2s or 3s, they're digging away, getting the coal out. Morris had to put that coal immediately into the tub, or else he would have been cussed by the miners for being too slow. So not only is he on his hands and knees, not only is he using the Gus and Crook, but he's having to work really hard to shovel in the coal into the little put behind. So he does that bit. That's not all, because once he gets to the end of the line, he then has to take it all out of the put and put it into a bigger tub. So he's 14, and he said that, you know, it had this terrible impact on him that it bled all around there and all around his legs, and you know it became gangrenous. That's not it was septic. I think it's probably the word. And he had to stop going to work. And he said in the story that the old boy said, "Oh, you'll be all right, Morris. Just pee on your hands and rub it in." Yeah, so that's the Gus and Crook, and if you go to the brilliant Radstock Museum, I don't know if you've been to the coal mining museum at Radstock, there is a Gus and Crook on display there, and there's a photograph. It's not very clear, but that one is from a pit in Easton. And there's a sketch there of a miner with a candle, which I'll come back to in a moment. Okay, so long hours, low pay, very difficult conditions. So consequently, poverty was high in Bedminster. You know, big families, tiny homes, and remarkably, these guys survived. And you know, looking at the garden history, you know, they worked 50, 60 years, and they still lived into their 80s. These were tough people, you know, and they went through some very difficult times here, and it describes the poor, dirty, badly ventilated district of you know, the North Street area of Bedminster. It seems to be that they were, how can I put it, a little bit behind the rest of the country in terms of trying to improve their working conditions. It seems to be they just got on with their job. They were, you know, they just knew this is what they had to do. It was their lives, you know. I often find that quite challenging to take, you know, but I remember talking to a cotton factory worker from Barn Hill, you know, and Flo, she said to me, yeah, it was tough, Garry, it was long hours, low pay, etc. But if you ever tell people it wasn't all that bad. It was just how they knew it. It was their way of life. And you know, we can easily look back and say, you know, this, oh, you shouldn't have done that, or you know, you should have worked for whatever, you know. But they just got on with it. Those people in Victorian times, and that's why strong communities evolved, like the Bedminster community, the Barton Hill community. Anyway, but towards the end of the period, towards the end of the Victorian period, they seem to be much more organised in their approach to working with the so-called masters. And at the end of 1889, they got a guy come down from the northeast called William Whitfield, who organised the miners into an association, what we might call today a union. And he went to the bosses and said, we want a 10% pay rise, please. And normally, when the miners had gone to ask for a pay rise, they just said, shut the door on the way out, please, you know, that's it, goodbye. And for some reason, Whitfield had this ability to build up a relationship with the mine owners and create better working conditions. So, you know, he's a really important part of Bristol and Somerset's history in terms of his negotiating skills. But to be honest, most of the support for miners and their families came from miners and their families, if that makes sense. So if a miner was injured, or you know, if a miner was killed, then it was normally other families, other miners who supported the bereaved families. And here's an example here of a guy called Thomas Bolt from West Street, Bedminster, who you know, wrote to the local paper and said, you know, sadly Isaac Garland, his friend, has died, leaving 4 children, all under the age of 9. Could we make sure we support the family? And that seemed to be something that went on for a long time. But certainly by the end of the Victorian period, most of the miners were taking out personal insurance. And they belonged to clubs and societies where you paid so much in a week and you knew there was that support system there. So I think to do that, they must have increased their wages. They must have had better wages towards the end of this period, that they could afford a penny a week for personal insurance. Okay, so I found roughly 156, I think it might well be 157 miners that died in Bedminster pits from around about 1776 to 1945. Now, when you think at St Geneth in South Wales, over 300 miners died in a single incident. Isn't that everybody? Over 300 in a single. We're not talking about a comparison here with South Wales. You know, there's also one in Newport where there were just outside Newport, where there were 200. But as I said at the beginning, we are looking at relatively small mines in comparison to South Wales mines. Most of the deaths were in the 4 big pits, and Ashton Vale had the greatest number. Around about a third of all the deaths occurred at Ashton Vale. The worst period was the period when, in theory, things were getting better. When wages were getting better, health and safety was getting better, the unions were started. But in that period, in 1886 and 1891 particularly, we saw 20 plus deaths, because 20 of those were at two single incidents. Common age death was 16, right? But they ranged from 12, 13-year-olds up to 70-year-olds. 2 main forms of death: either something falls on your head, or you get blown up. And you would probably find that in Pensford pits. You would probably find that in most pits. Those are the 2 main causes of death. But sadly, some of them were electrocuted, some of them were drowned, some of them were knocked over. And in the case of this poor old chap here, in the end, Thomas Somerville, age 75, going to work right down the shaft, and he died. Fell 200 yards down into the pit. This slide here is a little bit old now, because when I put this together a couple of years ago, the last known miner to die in Bedminster was William Thomas Garland, who happened to be my wife's great uncle. So I was sort of using this as a story. You know, I've told the story of the Garlands, and do you know what? The last one to die was a Garland. Well, there's new stuff coming out. What's this now? So at the bottom there, you will see, there's a typo on there. It should say Lewis Fry, 1879 to 1946. It looks like he went backwards there. So, excuse me, everybody. So it's 1946. So the last pit in Bedminster closed in 1925. How come Lewis Fry died in 1946? Some 20 years later. Yeah, lung disease. Since this slide, I found another miner, not a Garland, who died in 1948. I haven't found that many miners who died of lung disease from Bedminster. But in my research into the Pensford pits and the Bromley pits, there's a lot more. And the main reason is that in the 1930s, the Pensford pit started to use cutting machines. They were the most advanced cutting machines for what they did, but they actually created so much dust and they created so much waste, and most of it ended up in the miners' lungs. So a lot of miners in the Pensford region, Clutton, etc., I found died in the 1960s and 1970s. So the last coal came up in 1957, 1958 in Pensford. They were dying 20, 30 years later of lung disease. There are still a few miners around from Pensford. They're in their 80s now, and I have spoken to a couple of them, but I need to capture those last. You know, like they did the last person who served in the First World War. There are a few miners just about surviving that I need to interview. Okay, right. So how are we doing? Right. Okay, good. I'm going to cut this bit quite a bit now, but I wanted to show you specific examples of Garland members and the tragic ways in which they died. So Dean Lane Colliery, which we're going to come back to in a moment. There's a little sketch there by Anton Bantock, who was on the front of the poster that was produced. And Anton was he did a fantastic amount for the people of Bedminster. He created a university at Hartcliffe. It wasn't really a university, but he created opportunities for people to get to learn more. Anyway, so there's Dean Lane Colliery, 1746 to 1906. 38 miners killed there in a period of about 50 years, including some of the miners who we're going to look particularly at William Garland in a minute. Okay, here's Isaac, 1869. Thomas Bolt, we saw a Bolt earlier. A collier descended the pit with Henry James and John Smith. A few minutes after, an explosion of fire damp, that's the gas, took place, and they were warned of gas to use their safety lamps. Smith took the light to Garland, and then there was a rumbling noise and the flames. The deceased were badly burned at the upper body. A brother of the deceased, this is probably William or Daniel Garland, had heard that the lamp that they were using was broken or cracked, and no doubt that was the cause of the incident or accident. It's really interesting that in all the inquests that took place, all but one, and I haven't read every one of them, I'm not that boring, or I don't get that bored, I haven't read every one, but I've read quite a few of them. All bar one, the fault of the death of the miner was the miner. It was never the fault of the equipment, it was never the fault of the management, apart from one condition. So here, the brothers have said, we said about this lamp that there was a crack in it, and the gas got in there, obviously, in the flame, and no, that wasn't taken into consideration. So, yeah, quite a lot of controversy there. So Ashton Vale, there's a little sketch of the site down by the city ground, and a photograph sourced from the other book on Bedminster coal mining called Bristol's Forgotten Coalfield by Mike Taylor and Maggie Shapland. A very detailed, intensive, detailed book on coal mining in Bedminster. Okay, so this is Val, my wife's great uncle. So this would be Granny Fox's brother, and he died in 1922, 2 years after breaking his leg. And he went to work one day, he slipped, wasn't even doing it anyway, he slipped going down, the slopes were quite steep in places, he slipped, broke his leg, he was off work for 2 years, got an operation, but sadly he didn't survive the operation, he died with septicemia. And what was very interesting, reading the newspaper reports, there seemed to be a lot of support there for him and the family, in terms of the management providing money for the family, in terms of the unions being there, and obviously the hospitalisation that they got. Here's Lewis Fry now, which we mentioned, who died of silicosis, chronic bronchitis. Okay, right. 2 slides on Bishop Sutton Coalfield now to finish this part one. Yeah, this is a map that And there's not a lot of evidence, but the key thing, as you know, everybody, as you drive through the village, on the right-hand side, there's a garage. Yeah, and the old pit garage. So that was the site of one of the pits there. Then there's one bit further up. And yeah, so how many people? Well, my quick bit of research, and around about maximum was 120 coal miners. So when I said that Bedminster coal mines, there were 300, and roughly 300 in Pensford, we're not looking at a tiny mine here. With 120 people from the village and surrounding areas, it was relatively big, the two mines there. And there's a couple of famous names there. The Rees-Mogg family owned the site back in Victorian times, and also that name, that should read Sambourne, not Sambor Cook. That seems to be quite a common Chew Valley name, Sambourne. I don't know if you've come across that at all, anybody? Okay, it does seem to. And there's a picture there of the rescue brigade. I don't know if you recognise any names here. Phillips, Lovell, Reynolds, Moody, Shepherd, Blacker, Harris and Tibbs. Yeah, so local names. And it's the same with Pensford. When I gave my talk on Pensford, talking about the Dandos, and I mean, I'm the Dando. There's still lots of relatives in and around Pensford today connected to. So that's the end of part one, which sort of puts together the story of mining in Bedminster. And now we're going to have the explosion. Right, so I'm going to have to turn the little speaker up a minute. I will make you aware there's a bit of a blast in a minute. All right. Okay, so 10th of September 1886. Look at that photograph, everybody. Isn't that amazing? You've got, I mentioned earlier, you've got terrace houses virtually up to the edge of the mine here, all around. It's totally surrounding. That's looking towards West Street and looking towards Cameron Balloons that way. The city ground is down here, Asda is over there, if that makes sense. If you do know Bedminster at all, Bristol South Baths, still there, would you believe? Where are they? About here, I think, yeah. Okay, so September 1888, and I'll put a map in to show you a similar sort of image, really. And look at that lovely named place, Paradise Gardens. I'm sure it was paradise for the miners in Bedminster, yeah. There's actually an even better name called Little Paradise. Yeah. Anyway, so rows upon rows, terrace houses, you can see that quite clearly. So, on September the 9th, the day before the incident on the 10th, there was an explosion. And sadly, one person died. So keep that in your mind, everybody, because it's quite important now. Explosions were pretty rare. They were not known as fiery pits. And consequently, actually, because of that, miners only like to use candles. They didn't like to use the daily lamps. You've seen the miners' lamps here, the lovely brass lamps that are enclosed. But they preferred to have candles in their hats. Not helmets, everybody. Note, I'm saying hats, cloth hats, and they would stick the candle in there, or they would stick the candle on a piece of metal, like a pipe, really. Like a pipe, imagine the candle in, and with a spike on the end, and you could shove that into the coal face, or you could shove that into the wood, or you could, in this case. They prefer to use candles because you have much better direct light as well. Because if you are cutting at the coal face and you've got a daily lamp, it doesn't give you the direct. This is what I've read. It doesn't give you the direct light. But if you've got a lamp on your hat, you can actually see much clearer. And plus the fact it wasn't a fiery pit, so they didn't really want to use the daily lamp. So day before, everybody got the picture. There was an explosion. So surely somebody should have taken that into consideration what was going to happen the next day. So on Friday, September the 10th, before the shift started at 6 o'clock, Isaac Hamilton, the night fireman, went round the whole of the workings, as he had to do. It took him 2-3 hours to walk round. He had to report to his manager or under manager, and actually physically write down if there was any gas or any evidence of any of the waste products falling, you know, the rocks and the coal falling down. And he reported everything was safe. Another guy, James Horler, also did the same thing, and he was a little bit unsure. Not quite sure if there's gas or not. Apparently he gave in the evidence afterwards, but he didn't say that at the time. Right? So that's the issue in itself. One guy says there's no gas, the other one later, but not at the right time, later at the inquest said, possibly there might have been. Did I get it wrong? Okay, right. So, every day, everybody's come to work. It's maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. Just ordinary day. People having a chat. How's your missus? How's your George? How the city getting on? Robert's losing again. Whatever the story might be, just an ordinary day. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and the 300 men are making their way on the shift. This is not a Bedminster photograph, but it's just a lovely photograph. And you know, people would have been just chatting away. The bells have been ringing. The first cages were going down. It was just an ordinary day. It was 6 o'clock. By the way, not all miners live on the next door to the mines. Many did, but some might have walked 2 or 3 miles to get to work. They might have come from fish ponds, they might have come from Kingswood, or they might have come from Bedminster Down, or whatever. Many would have lived close to the place, but once they even walked for 45 minutes, say, or an hour, even when they got down to the bottom of the pit, they then had to walk another hour sometimes as well. So, in terms of Ashton Vale and in terms of, oh God, what's gone from me now, the other name, the other pit there, it went as far as Dundry. So they had to walk under the ground to Dundry. So it was there was a lot of walking that took place. In fact, I read a very funny story that one line went under towards East Bristol, and one day a couple of miners got back and they said, "You really going down there again? There's ghosts down there." And the manager said, "What do you mean there's ghosts? We ain't going down there, we can hear people talking. It's terrible." And he said, "Well, come on, let's go along." So they went along, and they heard voices down there. And this guy, the manager must have said, "Well, I don't know what's going on." And suddenly somebody else said, "You idiots, you're under Templemead Station. You can hear people talking." Now, how true that was, I don't know, but it's a lovely story. So look at that cage. So they're cramped in. There's no light. Imagine, being that young boy Morris when he started working, 14, 15-year-old boy, going down there. So the guy at the top would have had a system where he would talk the person down below through the knocking of the side of the cage, not through a telephone or any form of communication, purely by a series of symbols that he used. And so that was right. So they were working away. It was an ordinary day, getting on with what they were doing. No use of machinery, just the use of a pick and a shovel, and sometimes the use of explosives, but often it was just as it says there, dark, dirty, dangerous, damp conditions. Sometimes just 11 inches of space. Just literally crawling conditions and stuff. Not always. Not always. Okay, so they started at 6, at 3 o'clock, ready everybody? This happened. contemporary newspaper reports stated that people could hear the explosion above the surface. They could feel their houses move. And that was quite unusual because they were quite deep shafts. Right? So the rumours quickly spread around Bedminster that there'd been a terrible explosion and everybody was dead. You know, that's how Chinese whispers, whatever, work, doesn't it? You know, and then, oh no, it's only 40 to 50 people have died. And so miners who'd finished their shift the night before, miners who weren't working, wives, mothers, children if they weren't at school, they flocked around the gates to find out what had happened. And yeah, so you know, the cage system, basically, it would have been a very simple system like this. Remember those?
Mm.
Yeah.
that is Val's dad's shovel, and it probably was his dad's shovel. So this could well have been a coal miner's shovel. Right? Not obviously for doing the work, but at home to put the coal in the bunker. And so you know that it would have been a simple system of 3 blows that the cage is fine, we're moving up or down. And then if it was this one, then, oh, that was clever. How weird. That's spooky, isn't it, really? And then, of course, the worst one is if it was... then somebody had died. So, we will do that again in a moment. I won't do it for a lot, but just to give you the feel of what it was like, you know, that noise that was coming up. So, an exploration party was sent down straight away, including the managers of the site, Mr. Bennett, the owners, and his son. They went down, and you know, what they found was pretty bad, really. They found a lot of injured men. They found a lot of men who had been gassed. They found that they actually couldn't cope. You know, there was still a lot of gas in the air, and they had to come back pretty quickly. So by 5 o'clock, the first 2 guys came up, and it would have been this sound. Joseph Jeffrey, 15, Moses Rowland, 25, seriously burnt about the face and arms, and they were brought to the surface and they were put into a temporary room, and immediately the surgeon arrived. Almost straight away afterwards, George Hyman was brought up. George was a young lad who was halfway up the shaft, and the explosion went straight up the shaft, knocked him off his feet, and he fell straight down the shaft. So that was at 5 o'clock. Two young men, Tom and Harry Coles, 2 brothers, 18 and 20, they were brought to the surface. Their father, it says it was a working man with tears in his eyes, begged to be allowed to see them. And they were all right. I won't do it anymore now, but you'll get the hang of it, don't you? So by 7 o'clock, more and more men were being brought to the surface. More and more chatting was going on, and there's just a lovely bit of Bedminster language there, I would say. One of the miners was talking to his mates, and he forgot that he should have been home with his wife and family. And one of them said, "You better go down to the gates to see your missus, for she's very anxious about you." Now, at 7 o'clock, so we're now looking September, everybody, so it's getting dark now, isn't it? 7 o'clock at night. In all the anguish and all the dust and all the blood and all the terrible story, Bill Garland, William Garland, was brought up, badly burnt, taken to the General Hospital. But keep that in mind, everybody, that's really important. It's dark, the lamps lit up, and the body was taken out, he's still alive. So the family may well have gone to the general to see Bill. I don't know. They may well have gone. Hold on to that. Isaac Gibbs, 27, powerfully built man, quite unconscious and suffering severely from choke damp, the gas, stripped to his waist because he'd been hewing, cut in. There's a picture of the General Hospital, which you may or may not know, now converted into flats. If you've got a spare £1.5 million, you can buy a nice 3-bedroom flat overlooking the docks. And you know, a lot of guys were taken there, either conscious or you know, semi-conscious. Adrian Summers, 21, burned about the arms, carried to the room and conveyed in the ambulance. William Summers, we mentioned him earlier, the family, he was unconscious as well. Samuel Jones, all this is taken from newspapers. It's quite incredible how much information you can find with British newspaper archives. Very detailed information. Going on quite quickly here now. So by 10 o'clock at night, so 9 hours after the explosion, there was a realisation they weren't going to get anybody up now who were alive. They knew that now it was just a matter of bringing up the dead. So they brought Robert Tovey, well-known Bedminster name, Tovey, John Brake, a boy. This poor lad was, the corpse, badly burnt, severely burnt about 9 months previously. So he'd already suffered. James Marsh, quite peaceful. Some of them didn't have